McLaren's success piqued the interest of Porsche, and following their dominance at Le Mans in 1995, and of course their overall victory with a lightly modified road car, Porsche decided to join the GT1 party. But this time they decided to do it in a different way. They built a race car from the start. They'd recently retired, as a result of the now defunct Group C series, the 13-year-old 962 platform. And what they decided to do, as a result of it being commendably quick, was to take a 993 shell and graft onto the rear the 962 rear end. It was a 3.2-litre flat-six twin turbocharged unit that produced 595 horsepower and weighed in at 1,150 kilograms. At the 1996 Le Mans 24 Hours, the Porsche GT1s attended and finished second and third overall, and came first and second as a result in the GT1 class, effectively winning first time out. Such was the success of the car, they then developed it further for the next season. In order to satisfy the FIA's criteria for GT1 homologation, Porsche were forced to build 25 road-going variants of their race car, and thus the Strassen version was born. The first three cars featured 993 headlights, and from then on they featured 996 headlights, as from 1997 onwards that was the then current 911 model. Of course, the GT1 was also water-cooled, which was a reflection of the headlights, I guess, in some ways. There's a lot of style and design language that we can see in this Strassen version that reflects the future models that we didn't even hear about for the next 5 years, such as the Carrera GT, especially when we look at these mirrors and the sculpted side profile of the car. Very, very Carrera GT. Now, of course, the tub was a 993 tub, but with the roof cut off and cut behind the rear seats so that they could fabricate and fit the frame at the rear that the 962 based rear end, flat six 3.2-litre engine, twin turbo with 962 gearbox could be mated onto. The roof was fitted on, it had this bespoke windscreen. But when you look under the front and under the back, as we will in a minute, you can see that 993 tub. This was not a carbon fibre monocoque, it really was a steel tub. It really was a 911 underneath. So under the back here, we've got that huge intercooler that we discussed, sitting on top of the engine, fed by the snorkel at the front, ramming air into it, keeping it cool. We've got the turbochargers each side of the engine, and the engine sitting inside this framework that's welded and fabricated onto the back of the integrated roll cage. And then we've got the gearbox, which has got this huge cross member across the front that sits onto this frame, and all of the suspension and the wishbones hanging off the stress member gearbox. True race car, just like a 962. And it's great when you see this car in pieces, everything is individually got a serial number on it and a sticker, and all the panels have been individually weighed, marked up and numbered so that they could work out how much the car was going to weigh when it's completed. Just like the race cars. You know, this Strassen version was still built very much as a race car, just ever so slightly detuned. Whilst the centre of the car is of course a 993 tub, the outside clothing of it, this carbon fibre body, is so different. But Porsche worked really hard to have that silhouette of a 911. You know, these rear painted black areas and the fake rear window, trying to make you feel like it really was a 911. And of course, the defining feature from the rear end, this one-piece clamshell, looked like it had a 996 Porsche that had driven into some sort of aerodynamic cardboard box. Really extravagant and ever so necessary, because after all, this was a branding and marketing tool. Porsche wanted to see this car winning, which it did. It won the GT1 class at Le Mans in '96. Porsche wanted people to see a 911 racing, and it really was a 911 underneath, but it just featured the best bits of some other models and was a proper racing car. So now it's time to work out our driving impression, and it's the easiest one to get into. And when I get in here, once I've got over this big sill and the carbon doors and the roll cage, of course, I'm sitting in what appears to be a 993 RS bucket seat. It's actually a 964 bucket seat, but I've got a very 993 looking dash in front of me. And immediately, one thing that strikes me is that this car is not a carbon tub like the McLaren F1. but it really is a 993 Porsche shell, but heavily modified to be a race car. Almost Group C at the rear, 993 at the front, and a 993 interior, because this is where it stops. But one thing you notice immediately is that noise. It's like an F50. The engine's just bolted straight behind where I am onto that frame. And everything runs through the car, all the noises and the clunks and the rattles and the rear clamp moving ever so slightly. Like I said, like an F50. It's in some ways like an Enzo actually. But when you drive it, it's very Porsche. The engine, it's Porsche. The gearbox is like a rifle bolt, even more so than the McLaren. You know exactly what gear you've got, you're really comfortable with it. And then the engine, well, unlike the other two we're driving today, it's a laggy beast. It feels like once it's spooled up, it's just going to spit you off the road. Probably, actually, the hardest car to drive fast, I'm sure. Unfortunately today, I don't think we're going to be able to do that. We'll get close to it. Like I said, once you get over that lag, it goes, it really does. It's got the lowest horsepower of the three, but it's also the lightest, which is funny considering it's the one without any carbon in its tub.